What's up, guys? Hope you're having a good day. Happy Friday to you. In this video, we will be taking a deep dive into all of the main card fights taking place tomorrow night at UFC Fight Night, Volkov versus Overeem, from a betting perspective. I'm very, very sorry that this video is late. Life has been punching me in the dick lately, giving me a little bit of bad luck from here to there, and this week was unfortunately no different. My sister got basically caught COVID, had to go in the hospital, so I lost a little bit of time this week that I would have been spent researching fights, which is why I'm behind schedule on fight research, behind schedule on getting this YouTube video out to you. But to make it up for you, I know that it'll only be my hardcores watching this video, you know, the guys that'll be checking on Friday and Saturday to see if I'm going to be able to put this video out. So I've got a little treat for you, man. I thought to try and make it up to you guys who always come watch this video. I thought I'll give away some shit, man, to try and, sweeten the fact that this video is very late. So what I'm going to do for tomorrow night, Overeem versus Volkov, I am giving away 10 live betting passes to my live betting tips for the Volkov versus Overeem event. 10, boys. I've never done this before. So we're going to have a lot more people tailing these live betting tips tomorrow night than we usually would. As you can see, you want to get involved in live betting when I'm involved, because all we do is win, 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 win. All we do is win, boys, you know? You can see the record is crazy, over the last 4 years. You can see that in the second half of last year, we went 17-1 on UFC events. We put together a huge winning streak. And with there being 13 fights on tomorrow's card and plenty of competitive fights, tomorrow's card actually looks decent for live betting. So I'm giving away 10 live betting passes. All you need to do to try and claim one of these is go to my website, MMABettingTips.com. You'll find the link for that in the description below. Roll the mouse over betting tips, go to live betting tips. Then hit learn more for live betting tips. And go to join now on this $50 one-time payment thing. Pop that in, $50. Hit join now. That will take you through to the cart. All you need to do is type in Overeem to the cart and then hit apply coupon. And you'll see, as if by magic, the total you'll have to pay is $0. Now, you might have to put some personal details in, some card details. I'm not too sure. I haven't actually tested this. But basically, no matter what information you put in to register for an account, you won't have to pay anything. This will be completely free. So I'm giving away the first 10 people to jump on my site and buy this live betting pass will be able to live bet with me tomorrow night for free. And you should give it a try, because you're going to love it. And yeah, just so I would do that to make it up to you guys for this video being late. Then all you need to do, once you've bought the membership, you'll have access to everything on the site. Tomorrow night, when the fights are scheduled to start, just roll the mouse over betting tips, go to live betting tips, and you will have access to this page where you'll be able to listen to an audio stream of me commentating the fights from a betting perspective. And I think you'll like it. Give it a listen, even if you don't even want to follow the bets or like live betting, you'll probably just enjoy the commentary. Most people do. So yeah, 10 of those, boys. Go and see if there's some still available. If you're quick, there probably will be. So with that being said, if you like this video, please also hit the like button, boys, and subscribe if you haven't already. It would mean a lot to me. And with that being said, let's get into the first fight that we're going to be breaking down, which is going to be Dariush against Diego Ferreira. Now, Diego Ferreira was the first name that jumped out at me as a potential bet on this card, because he's got kind of like a Brazilian Diaz style. He utilizes a very similar style of fighting to Nate Diaz in terms of, him not being particularly dangerous standing, but the danger from Diego Ferreira's striking basically comes from the relentless pace that he could fight at. So Ferreira is primarily, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu based fighter, but because he doesn't have the offensive wrestling to take his opponents down, his method of being able to use his BJJ is to just keep coming forward with lots of pressure, so eventually maybe his opponents feel compelled to take him down in order to alleviate that pressure, or he could kind of wear them down, get them tired, which makes it easier for him to shoot the takedown and get the fight to the ground. Now, what's interesting about this matchup is that when we look at Beneil Dariush, Dariush is usually a guy that's difficult to bet against, because we always say this guy's ground game is at such a high level. If he's able to get you to the ground, you're in a lot of trouble. What's interesting about this fight is both Beneil Dariush and Diego Ferreira are at a very high level on the ground. They're both super high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. And so I think if this fight did go to the ground, they'd kind of cancel each other out. And the likelihood is, I think this is going to be a stand-up fight. If the fight stays standing, it's kind of tricky as to who is going to come out on top. I would say both these guys have very different styles of striking, but they've both got strengths and weaknesses. So Dariush has a very kicks-based style of striking. He's got that base in Muay Thai. He's got beautiful body kicks, beautiful leg kicks. He's not great defensively, though. Dariush's boxing defense is very bad. And because of that, he does get dinged a lot. If you go back and watch his last few fights, his fights against, the fights that he's won against Drakkar Klose, even Scott Holtzman and Drew Dober, you'll see that he does get lit up at moments in each of those fights. He does get briefly wobbled. He's very good at recovering very quickly and getting his head back in the game, but his boxing defense is very bad. He's definitely there to be hit. Diego Ferreira is not a particularly dangerous striker. Remember what we were saying, he's got that Diaz style where he likes to come forward, put a lot of pressure on his opponents, but he doesn't really have any power in his hands. He's more of a volume striker. He's also a slow starter. What I would say about Diego Ferreira is he's nowhere near as dangerous offensively as Beneil Dariush, but he's much better defensively. There's nothing special about Ferreira's striking defense. He just likes to stay behind the high boxing guard, but he is very good at reading his opponent. When his opponent comes forward and attacks him, he's very, very good at just slipping slightly out of range with head movement and blocking punches on his arms or gloves with that high boxing guard. So this is interesting because Dariush is very dangerous standing, but Ferreira's defense is pretty good, and he's also quite tough as well. This one is a difficult fight for me to call because I really think it's going to come down to Dariush's gas tank. Dariush does have a history of slowing down as the fight progresses, and Ferreira is one of these guys that can fight at a very high pace for 15 minutes. Ferreira is an interesting case because he's 36 years old now, which means he's getting older and older. He should be starting to decline from fight to fight. And on top of that, Ferreira's also one of these guys that seems to kill himself to make weight. Whenever we see Ferreira weighing in, he also always looks like a skeleton. It looks like it was a very tough weight cut for him. But for whatever reason, those tough weight cuts don't seem to have any impact on Ferreira's performance, and he can still show up and go hard for 15 minutes. That's significant here because Ferreira's got a great gas tank, and his output goes higher and higher and higher in every round. Whereas when we look at Beneil Dariush, he has been known to slow down as the fight goes on. He starts very strong, but then fades. The problem I've got with this one is that we haven't seen Dariush go 3 hard rounds for a long time. So he definitely slowed down quite badly against Evan Dunham. He definitely slowed down against Michael Johnson. But the problem is these fights were a very long time ago. We can see all of his fights over the last 2 years have ended very quickly, so they don't tell us very much about his gas tank. And the fight against Thiago Moises, it was an absolute cakewalk. It was an easy fight for Dariush. Moises took the fight on about a week's notice and just kept pulling guard, which meant he didn't make Dariush work very hard. So Dariush didn't gas because he just didn't have to exert anywhere near as much energy as he usually would. So this one's tricky for me because if Dariush shows up with a gas tank that he came into the Dunham fight with, I think Ferreira's just going to walk forward, pressure him Diaz style, break him down, and grind out a decision win. But I don't want to write Dariush's gas tank off for a fight that took place 3 years ago, because he could have improved his gas tank tremendously since then. On top of that, Ferreira's been quite inactive. We haven't seen him in about a year, and he looked alright against Pettis, but nothing special. His real breakout performance was when he beat Mairbek Taisumov in Abu Dhabi. But, you know, again, that fight was a long time ago now. It was September 2019. So with Ferreira being 36 years old now, and with the weight cut being, you know, seemingly very difficult for him, he could have declined a lot since he looked absolutely phenomenal against Mirbek Taisumov. What I will say is this. If the version of Ferreira the Foot Taisumov shows up and the version of Dariush the Foot Dunham shows up, I think Dariush is screwed, and I think Ferreira will win this. But because Ferreira's been quite inactive, because so many of Dariush's fights have ended very quickly over the last 2 years, this one is a tricky one for me. And so, you know, I definitely lean heavily towards Ferreira. I'll be betting him small, but nothing major. Just like a small experimental lab bet on one betting account I'm trying to grind up. No major bet on Ferreira here for me, but I definitely lean towards him. Make of that what you will. At even money, both guys around even money, I think you have to lean towards Ferreira here, but it's by no means a safe bet, and by no means a confident bet, because Dariush is dangerous. We now move on to the next fight I'm going to be talking about in this video. Cody Stamann against Askar. So I think when we heard about this fight, we were like, oh, cool. Askarov is stepping up on a week's notice to fight Cody Stamann. But obviously that isn't what happened. We've got a guy so good they named him twice. Askar, Mr. AK-47, making his UFC debut on 7 days' notice. Cody Stamann was, of course, originally scheduled to fight Andre Ewell. Now he's stepping up to face Askar. So, Askar taking the fight on about a week's notice. And I don't want to spend too long on this one. There are a lot of heavy favourites on this card. You got Corey Sandhagen, Cody Stamann, Michael Johnson, Mike Rodriguez, Timur Valiev, Karol Rosa, Devontae Smith, Ode Osborne, and Yusuf Zalal, right? This card is full of big favourites. But out of all of them, I would say Cody Stamann's definitely the safest. I've gone back, I've watched some footage on Askar, and I can't say I'm that impressed. He does appear to have abnormal power for the division. He does hit very hard, but his striking is quite sloppy. But if he catches you, he really seems to bother his opponents. Having said that, Cody Stamann has had 23 pro fights, and he's never been knocked out. So even though Askar does appear to have, abnormal power, Cody Stamann's tough as nails. He could definitely take a shot. He's fought guys a hell of a lot tougher than Askar. So looking at Askar's past fights, he is primarily a grappler, which is obviously bad news when you're facing someone like Cody Stamann, who's an extremely strong wrestler. Stamann's an excellent wrestler. He has good offensive wrestling, good takedown defense. He's very difficult to hold down. He's got that compact Team Alpha Male type body type. I know he does a train at Team Alpha Male, but he's got that trademark Team Alpha Male body type. He's like a coiled spring. When you take him down, he immediately pops back up to his feet. So with Askar primarily being a grappler, this is a bit of a checkmate matchup for him. I do think Cody Stamann's the safest bet on the card. Unfortunately, his odds reflect that, with him being one of the biggest favourites on the card. But I just don't see Askar really being able to do much here. Cody Stamann's only real weakness is that his output does drop as the fight goes on. So Cody Stamann almost always loses the third round of his fights because he does slow down as the fight goes on. But Askar's volume slows down as the fight goes on as well, so I don't think that's going to be an issue here. On top of that, Askar's taking the fight on a week's notice, so he's probably not in the best shape. This is just one of those matchups where we don't want to spend too much time on it, because quite simply, Cody Stamann's just better than Askar in every single aspect of MMA. There's not really much else we could talk about. So that's it for that one. We'll now move on to the next fight. This is going to be Alexandre Pantoja against Manel Kape. And what we'll do, we will play Manel Kape's fight in the background for you guys to watch. His last fight against Kai Asakura, and this took place a pretty long time ago, actually, about 14 months ago in December 2019. So, Manel Kape, obviously in the white shorts, he is making his UFC debut against Alexandre Pantoja this week. And every once in a while, a fight comes along where I spend a decent amount of time researching it and I just can't get a strong read on it. You just get certain fighters that I really struggle to work out. And completely holding my hands up here, I'm really struggling to work Manel Kape out. Now, I've watched 4 or 5 of his past fights and I don't really know what to make of him. So what I'm going to do, I can't really give you much insight or direction into how I think this fight is going to play out. All I could do is really summarize, what both guys do well. And then if you're betting this fight, you may be able to, use that information to try and make a good betting decision. So if we quickly take a look at the odds on this one, we have got Alexandre Pantoja at around 1.90, which is minus 111 for an implied probability of 53%. And if we take a look at the odds on Mr. Pantoja, both guys around about the same money, right? Both guys around even money. So this is a very tricky fight for me to kind of gauge, because in all of Kape's recent fights over the last sort of 2-3 years, he's fought in wrestling shoes and he's fought in a ring. Now, Kape, for the most part, for the majority of his recent career, seems to have trained in Thailand, aka Thailand, in the Mike Swick, which is a great gym to train at. And he does look like a wrestler. So he's wearing the wrestling shoes. He's got that square stance like a wrestler. And he doesn't really throw a very high volume of strikes, but he does like to commit hard to deep double leg takedowns. So Kape looks like a wrestler, but I'm not 100% sure. He just looks like one. That's where this fight becomes a little bit difficult to gauge, because with all of Kape's recent fights taking place in Rising, and therefore his recent fights taking place in a ring, it's really difficult to assess a wrestler's wrestling and grappling and ground game in a ring, because Kape can't really drive through and shoot takedowns like he will in the UFC, because there's nowhere to really work for takedowns in, if you get what I mean. In terms of, we're going to be talking about it in the next fight with Clay Guida and then with Frankie Edgar. Usually what will happen is if a wrestler shoots in on his opponent's hips, drives him into the cage and starts working for a takedown, he can use the cage as a tool to get the takedown. But you can't really do that in a ring, because as soon as you shoot in on your opponent and they back up and get to the ropes, you just end up shooting right through the ropes. So a lot of wrestlers are more reluctant to use their wrestling when they fight in rings. And so I can't really get a read on Manel Kape's wrestling. What I can tell you is that he probably doesn't want to wrestle in this fight, because Alexandre Pantoja is a super high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He was the former BJJ coach at Nova União, which means he was responsible for training guys like Renan Barão, Claudia Gadeja, Hakron Diaz, Johnny Eduardo, Jose Aldo. Alexandre Pantoja's BJJ is super high level, to the point where Claudia Gadeja even brought him in as one of her team coaches when she coached The Ultimate Fighter against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And so Pantoja's ground game is ultra legit. He's fucking devastating on the ground. Unfortunately, there's not that much footage available on Kape's ground game from recent fights. I went back and took a look at his fight against Ulka Sasaki from all the way back in 2018. But it's tough for me to be harsh on Kape for what I saw against Ulka Sasaki, because he's only 27 years old. This fight against Sasaki took place, 2-3 years ago now. And the amount that a fighter can improve between the ages of 24 and 25 up to, 27 is immeasurable, especially when you take into consideration the fact that Manel Kape has been training at a really good gym, aka Thailand. And we'll see if we can actually bring this up for you so you can take a look at it. We may as well have this one in the background since we're talking about Pantoja's grappling. Let's get some evidence of Manel Kape's grappling up as well. But just beware. Just beware here, guys. Kape's grappling does not look good here. Looks very, very low level. very, very low level. But remember, it was a very long time ago. And it's possible that he could have improved a lot since this fight. This fight was back in 2018. However, this fight is a huge red flag because we know Pantoja is super high level on the ground, and we know Manel Kape, in this fight at least against Okazaki, looked very, very low level. Now, Pantoja doesn't have the best offensive wrestling. He's not particularly good at getting fights to the ground, but when he does, he's a nightmare. That's why I said earlier on, I'm not sure if Kape really wants to wrestle in this fight, because Pantoja is probably going to be a much higher level than him on the ground. But that's a bit of an issue, because if Kape's base is wrestling, instinctively, he might try to use wrestling. And against Pantoja, that's probably going to get him into a lot of trouble, especially with how low level on the ground he looked here against Sasaki. So if we think that, you know, Pantoja's definitely going to have an advantage on the ground. We see Kape giving up a really weak takedown there against Sasaki, and you're going to see Kape look pretty weak on the ground here. We could be 100% sure Pantoja is going to have a huge advantage on the ground, even if he's not very good at getting it there. So Kape might come into this fight and fight smart, use his wrestling in reverse to keep the fight standing, where it's very difficult to gauge how this one's going to go in a stand-up fight, because Alexandre Pantoja is someone who fights like a fighter in a much higher weight class, which isn't a good thing. You know, when we think about flyweights, they're often, you know, light on their feet, loads of footwork, very bouncy, you know, good movement. Pantoja is completely different. Pantoja fights more like a welterweight. He's very flat-footed and a little bit slow. He throws single shots, doesn't really throw combinations. Hand speed's quite slow. Just doesn't have that bounciness of a flyweight. He's not that athletic. And that could get him into trouble against someone like Kape. Kape's got good footwork, good movement, decent power in his hands. He likes to blitz in and out. And I worry for Pantoja that if this fight stays standing, Kape might be able to use his wrestling in reverse, use his footwork, his speed, his movement to just kind of blitz in and out of boxing range and pick Pantoja off. Pantoja likes to just throw single shots, but like I say, he's pretty slow. And I could see, because of how slow he is, he may have a lot of trouble cutting the cage off, actually getting on Kape and getting to Kape and landing. But I'm conscious I'm rambling a little bit on this one because I don't really know what to say. I just don't have a good read on this fight. I'm struggling with this one, boys. I'm definitely not going to be betting it. I just don't really have a very good read on what kind of fighter Kape is. So it's an easy pass for me. And it's not very often you'll hear me say stuff like that. Usually I've got strong opinions on fights. But I was really, really struggling with that one. We now go on to the next fight that we're going to be talking about in this video, which is going to be Michael Johnson against Clay the Carpenter Guida. Clay the Carpenter Guida. And I just want to double check something in a second. Clay the Carpenter Guida. Is this... Don't forget to hit the like button, boys, and subscribe if you haven't already. We're all Gucci, boys. We're all Gucci. We're all Gucci. And just one more thing that I want to check. We're all Gucci, boys. Alright, we are all Gucci. Anyway. We'll now get into the next fight, which I want to talk about. Michael Johnson against Clay Guida. Now, straight away, this is a very easy fight to work out. But it's not a very easy fight to predict the outcome of. But that's okay, because you can use that information to make money for sure on a fight like this. So if we take a look at the odds, we've got Michael Johnson currently as a big favourite. He's currently hovering around odds of about 1.44, which is minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. If we take a look at the odds on Clay Guida, he's currently around about a 2.80 underdog, which is plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. So let's start by looking at the probabilities here. When you look at the odds on Michael Johnson, currently around about a 69% favourite in the eyes of the bookies, because really that's all odds are. Odds are just probabilities. The bookies don't let you know the probabilities because they don't want you to realise when you're actually getting a bad deal. But the fact is, the bookies, with the way they've set the odds out here, believe Johnson's going to win this fight 69% of the time. I think that's fucking crazy, in my opinion. I think that's absolutely crazy. When you think about how steep of a probability 69% is, that indicates that the bookies really don't give Guida much of a chance here. You know, if we look at the odds on Guida, 2.80 plus 180 is about 36%. So they're only really giving Guida around a 1 in 3 chance of winning this fight, which is absolutely bonkers. This is a very clear-cut fight and a very easy fight to work out. Clay Guida has a huge advantage when it comes to grappling, and Michael Johnson has a huge advantage when it comes to striking. So when we look at what both guys bring to the table, both guys are very, very good in the area that the other is very weak. So Michael Johnson will absolutely cruise in a stand-up fight, but if Guida can get this fight to the ground, Michael Johnson's in big trouble. So in order for Michael Johnson to deserve to be this big of a favourite, we have to be absolutely sure that there's no way Guida can get this fight to the ground and use his wrestling. Based on past performances, that's simply not the case here. Michael Johnson's takedown offense is good, but it's not bulletproof, and Clay Guida's offensive wrestling is very, very good. Let's talk a little bit about the X factors here. Obviously, both guys have got tons of miles on the clock. Clay Guida, 39 years old, and he's had 55 pro fights. Father Time is going to be knocking on Guida's door, and his better days are definitely behind him. Having said that, Guida hasn't shown too many signs of big and obvious decline that we see in a lot of guys when they get to this age. Guida's gas tank still looks good. You know, he still looks pretty much just as athletic as he had over the last 2-3 years. You know, it doesn't look like he's slowing down in any way. It doesn't look like he doesn't look like a 39-year-old fighter. He's still pretty explosive, very physically imposing with his grappling. And on top of that, his chin is still definitely very much intact. If we look at Clay Guida's career, he's got a bit of a legendary chin. He's never really been KO'd in terms of, you know, we've seen guys catch him late on in fights if he's got tired, or we've seen guys wear him down with volume. But we've never seen a guy just go out there and flatline Clay Guida. His chin has always been very good. You know, we can see he's had 55 pro fights. He got stopped with volume there against Brian Ortega, and he got stopped there with volume against Chad Mendes when he couldn't get the takedown. But aside from that, he's never been KO'd, which is kind of crazy when you consider the fact that Clay Guida has been fighting the best fighters in MMA for the past 15 years. All the way back to when he fought Josh Thompson in Strikeforce. Clay Guida has been consistently competing at the highest level of sports for 15 years. And even now, his gas tank's still there, his chin is still there, and his athleticism is still there. So yes, he's old. Yes, he has a lot of miles on the clock. Yes, he's not the fighter he once was. But there still seems to be something there. Father Time hasn't ruined him yet. Maybe he ruins him this weekend. Maybe Clay Guida shows up and looks a shadow of himself. But from what we've seen so far, Guida still looks to be pretty much like Guida's always been. Michael Johnson's another fighter with a lot of miles on the clock. He's had 35 pro fights, and definitely his better days are behind him. Now, Johnson is only 34 years old, but he spent a lot of time in the cage. He's been in a lot of wars. You know, he's taken a lot of damage. And just like Father Time will be knocking on Guida's door from time to time, he's going to be knocking on Michael Johnson too. Now, we've got to call an egg, right? Ultimately, if this fight stays standing, it's going to be very difficult for Clay Guida. Michael Johnson's got great footwork, great boxing. He's a dangerous southpaw striker. And Clay Guida's got a very basic style of fighting. He's very awkward. He's very unorthodox. But he doesn't really have any power in his hands. Doesn't pose a threat to Johnson, standing at least. And there's not a lot he can really do to basically stop Johnson from lighting him up like a Christmas tree, basically. Johnson's advantages when it comes to standing are absolutely huge. Having said that, we've just looked at Guida's record, talked about his style, and we know that his chin hasn't let him down yet. Johnson's perceived to be a dangerous striker, and he is. However, his record shows us something that's a little bit interesting. If we take a look at this, we can see that over the last 8 years, he's only got 2 wins by knockout. So the last time Michael Johnson knocked someone out was all the way back in 2016 when he knocked out Dustin Poirier. Now, obviously, it's a huge feather in your cap knocking out someone as good as Dustin Poirier. But it was a bit of a flash KO. There was a lot of rivalry at the time where Michael Johnson was representing the Black Zillions. Dustin Poirier was representing American Top Team. There were two big rival gyms in Florida. And the fight came to a head. Both guys went out, got into big exchanges, and MJ caught Poirier and knocked him out. It was a bit of a flash KO. Take nothing away from MJ, but it was Poirier fighting pretty recklessly. It was actually that point which marked a turning point in Poirier's career, where he said he fought angry and emotional against MJ, and he'd never let that happen again. And obviously, since 2016, we've seen Poirier go on an absolute tear to the point where he should probably be the lightweight champion now, with the situation in the lightweight division with Khabib kind of, retired and there being no clear lightweight champion. So, hasn't KO'd anyone since 2016. Before that, it was 2013 against Gleison Tibau. So dating back to 2012, he's only KO'd 2 guys since 2012. Now, I know Johnson has been competing against some very high-level opponents, but maybe Johnson's not as dangerous as we think he is, especially against someone as tough and as gritty as Clay Guida. So if the fight stays standing, it's very difficult for Guida. He's going to have to get this fight to the ground. So what are Guida's chances of getting this fight to the ground? To be honest, I think they're pretty good. Michael Johnson has amazing initial takedown defense, which means when you first shoot in on him, he's very, very good at reading his opponent, seeing that takedown entry come in, moving back slightly, clearing his legs, and sprawling out of takedowns. It's very difficult to get in on Michael Johnson's legs. This is because he's such a high-level striker that he reads his opponent very well. He can see the takedown entry coming. That makes this fight quite tricky for Guida, because Guida can't set up his takedowns with strikes. MJ knows every single time the Guida comes forward, Guida's going to be looking for a takedown, which does make Guida quite predictable, and it does make it difficult for him to set the takedowns up and get a hold of Johnson. Having said that, Johnson's takedown defense completely falls apart if you grab a hold of him and use chain wrestling. If you are persistent with takedowns, you can get in on Johnson's legs, drag him to the ground, and from there, he is very, very low level on the ground. I think Guida can cause Michael Johnson big problems here because Guida's a very persistent grappler. When he shoots, he commits everything to a takedown. Guys that have struggled against Michael Johnson are guys who have shot a takedown, and once he's slipped his hips back and sprawled out of their takedown entry, they've kind of just not followed through. They've let him off the hook, they've gone back to kickboxing range, reset, and got back into a kickboxing match. Guida's not like that. When he shoots a takedown, he'll commit everything to it. And those are the kind of guys that give Johnson a problem, because he's not good at defending chain wrestling. He's very good at getting his legs away from that initial shot, but his takedown defense aside from that is pretty poor. Michael Johnson could struggle badly here against Clay Guida because he completely falls apart on the ground. It's not a cardio thing, it's not a technique thing, it's a mental thing where if you get Michael Johnson to the ground, he just seems to completely check out mentally and cave. And Clay Guida is relentless on the ground. He's got a decent enough gas tank to push a decent pace for 3 rounds. And he goes hard, man. Johnson's probably going to have a lot of success early. But as the fight goes on, as Guida gets more confident, I think he can cause Michael Johnson some big problems. What I will say about Michael Johnson is his submission defense is very poor. And he also hesitates a lot on the ground. When we look at Johnson, when we always talk about how to react to being taken down, you want to be like those Team Alpha Male guys, like a Cody Garbrandt or a Chad Mendes or Uriah Faber or a TJ Dillashaw. Obviously, some of those guys don't train at Team Alpha Male anymore, but they come from the Team Alpha Male lineage. You think of a Joey Benavidez. What do all these Team Alpha Male guys do? All these Team Alpha alumni, or whatever the fuck you call them. What do they all have in common? As soon as you take a Team Alpha Male alumni down, they immediately pop back up to their feet like a spring. They don't give you any time on the ground to establish a dominant position. That's what you want from a fighter. What you don't want from a fighter is when you get taken down, they kind of hesitate a little bit, freeze on the ground, and they don't do anything. This moment of hesitation gives their opponent an opportunity to flatten them out, establish a dominant position, maybe work to take their back, and it just is not the way to do things. When Michael Johnson gets taken down, he hesitates, and that's why I think Clay Guida is going to have a lot of success here. If you go back and watch Clay Guida's last fight against Bobby Green, we know that Bobby Green, even though we know him as a striker, he started out as a wrestler. He's got amazing takedown defense, and the one thing about Bobby Green is that he's exceptionally difficult to hold down. He's like these Team Alpha Male guys. If you go back and watch any of Bobby Green's fights, as soon as you take this guy down, he immediately looks to pop back up to his feet. And yet Guida did a pretty good job of getting Green down and controlling him for periods on the ground. He wasn't able to achieve much, didn't rack up much damage, he didn't really flatten Green out and hold him down and dominate him or anything like that. But he did stifle Green, and Green wasn't able to pop back up and disengage quickly for the most part in that fight. That's very telling for me, because Bobby Green's takedown offense and ground game is absolutely light years ahead of Michael Johnson. So any kind of success that Guida had against a guy like Bobby Green has to be taken seriously. And I think the odds are off here, because I think people are underestimating how difficult it is to take Bobby Green down and hold him down. I don't think they realise how tricky Green is in that area. So for Guida to have as much success as he did against Bobby Green is a little bit of an indicator to me that he's likely to cause Michael Johnson big trouble. Now, this is one of those fights where no one can feel confident on this. It's very easy to work out scenarios that can go down here in terms of if the fight stays standing, we know Guida's going to struggle. If the fight goes to the ground, we know Michael Johnson's going to struggle. But we don't know who's going to be able to impose their game plan, right? We don't know if Johnson's going to be able to keep the fight standing or not. But because we don't know, because there is nothing anyone watching this video can show me which can, beyond all reasonable doubt, show that Johnson can keep this fight standing and show that he'll be okay if this fight does go to the ground, we therefore have a situation where there is value on Clay Guida. Because we're in a situation where both guys have extreme weaknesses. Guida has the weakness standing. MJ has the weakness on the ground. Both guys have the strengths to exploit the other's weakness. In that situation, you should not have a big favourite. I'm not saying Clay Guida is going to win this weekend, but I am saying there's value on Clay Guida. At the end of the day, all we can do is try and put our money in strong positions. If you ask me who I think is going to win this fight between Michael Johnson and Clay Guida, I have no fucking idea. I don't know. I've watched 2 hours of footage on these guys, and I can't tell you who's going to win. But what I can tell you is that I think Guida's got a good chance of taking Michael Johnson down and causing him trouble. In that situation, when you can bet one guy is a big underdog that has a clear path to victory, you should consider betting them. When we look at the odds on this fight, if we consider this fight to be close to 50-50, given the fact that Guida has just as much of a chance of getting this fight to the ground as Johnson has of keeping it standing, realistically, you'd expect a 1-to-1 payout on your money, right? The flip of a coin. If I bet 1, I'm getting 1 back. If I bet 100, I'm getting 100 back. But that's not what we're saying here. In this situation, with Clay Guida being such a big underdog, even though the outcome could go either way, could be decided on a coin flip, it's 50-50 who comes out on top, we're getting 180 for every 100 we risk. Almost a 2-to-1 payout. That's a very good risk to reward ratio. I can't tell you Guida's going to win. I'm not confident Guida's going to win, but I am very confident there's value here. And do your own research and consider betting him. I would highly recommend you take a look at this fight. Do some research, watch some past fights, come to your own conclusion. But I think Guida's definitely worth a look this weekend. We now move on to the next fight. Corey the Sandman Sandhagen against Frankie the Answer Edgar. Kick in the door, wave in the 4-4. Now, on this card, there are plenty of big favourites. Like I say, we've got Sandhagen, Stamann, Michael Johnson, Mike Rodriguez, Timur Valiev, Karol Rosa, Devontae Smith, Ode Osbourne and Yusuf Zalal, all as big favourites. And we've said this week that Cody Stamann is one of those big favourites, but when you look at his fight against Askar, there's very little risk there for Stamann. He deserves to be a big favourite. What's interesting about this fight is that Corey Sandhagen is in the same odds range as Cody Stamann. There's not a lot of difference in the odds between Sandhagen and Stamann, and yet there is so much more risk for Sandhagen here. It's unbelievable. This is a very, very, very risky fight for Sandhagen, and a potentially very, very tricky matchup. I'm going to bring up UFC stats to show you what I mean. So, this is one of those fights where I feel the way the odds are kind of set out in a way to scare people away from betting Corey Sandhagen. Because realistically, we know Sandhagen should be the favourite, right? You'd have to be a fucking dumbass not to have Sandhagen as the favourite here. He's got so many advantages. He's got a significant advantage over Edgar when it comes to striking. He's absolutely huge, right? He's got a big size advantage. He's 5'11" with a 70-inch reach compared to Edgar, who's 5'6" with a 68-inch reach. So Sandhagen's going to tower over Frankie Edgar. And on top of that, Sandhagen is a lot younger than Frankie Edgar, right? He's only 28 years old. Edgar's 39 years old, which means there's an 11-year age gap in the fight. The younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's an 11-year age gap in a fight. Let me say that again because I muddle my words. The younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's an 11-year age gap in a fight. So just going by the numbers, Edgar's got his hands full here. But we know the fights aren't fought on paper, they're fought in a cage. And so from a stylistic point of view, this is a potentially very difficult fight for Corey Sandhagen. It's tough. It's very, very tough, boys. So, if the fight stays standing, it's very difficult for Edgar. Sandhagen's very good at taking control of the centre of the octagon, using his length to just force his opponent onto the back foot with pressure and chip away at him, using a very diverse range of strikes. The strikes that hurt you, the strikes that knock you out are the ones you don't see coming. And Sandhagen's very, very good at setting his opponents up with his unusual style, his movement, his footwork, his length, his wide range of strikes. The fight stays standing, Edgar's going to have a tough time here. But we've never really seen Corey Sandhagen fight a wrestler. If you take a look at his fights in the UFC, he's fought Austin Arnett, who's a striker, Uri Alcantara, who for the most part is a striker with a bit of BJJ, Mario Bautista, striker, John Lineker, striker, Rafael Assunção, a bit of everything, did fight Aljamain Sterling, who's a wrestler and got submitted, and then Marlon Moraes, who's a striker. We haven't seen Corey Sandhagen fight a wrestler. And Frankie Edgar is a former NCAA Division 1 level wrestler. Frankie Edgar's wrestling is absolutely fucking legit. It's legit. Now, we haven't seen that much of it in recent years, but that's because he's been fighting guys who are either very good on the ground, like Brian Ortega and Pedro Munoz, or guys that are very, very difficult to take down, like Max Holloway. But when we have seen Frankie Edgar fight guys whose takedown offense isn't completely bulletproof, like Cub Swanson, like Yair Rodriguez, like Jeremy Stevens, Frankie Edgar's done very well. And that is what is interesting about this fight, because we've got Sandhagen as a huge favourite, but he hasn't proven to anyone that his takedown offense is good enough to stand up to Frankie Edgar's wrestling. If we take a look at the stats on this fight, we can see that Corey Sandhagen's takedown defense is only 30%, guys. It's only 30%. Corey Sandhagen's takedown offense is pretty poor, and he hasn't fought any wrestlers. If you go back and watch his fight against Rafael Assunção, Assunção gets him down easily, and I would also say that Sandhagen's ground game is quite unconvincing. Now, when we look at Frankie Edgar, the one thing that is going to make it difficult for him to get Sandhagen to the ground and hold him down is the size. He's only 5'6", and Corey Sandhagen is 5'11". It's not going to be easy for a guy as small as Frankie to hold someone down that's as big as Sandhagen. However, there is one aspect of that size that does make this a little bit tricky for Sandhagen. Because he's 5'11" and he stands so much taller than Frankie. He's also got that long, lean, skinny frame, those skinny legs, which makes it a lot easier for Frankie Edgar to shoot in on those legs with nice double leg takedowns and upset his balance. So, when you look at this matchup, it's one of those fights where Sandhagen hasn't proven to us that he could keep this fight standing. If Frankie comes into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, he could do very well. And let's be real, he's been in this situation before. It wasn't that long ago that Frankie was matched up against the young, exciting, flashy striker that nobody gave Frankie a chance against when he fought Yair Rodriguez back in 2017. And Frankie went out there with a fucking wrestling singlet on, threw Rodriguez on the ground and just absolutely mauled him for 10 minutes. Literally mauled him like a fucking hungry German shepherd. He completely dominated Yair Rodriguez with wrestling. Now, I know that fight was 3 years ago and Frankie's a lot older now. But we haven't seen anything to suggest that Frankie can't go out there, take Sandhagen down and dominate him on the ground. So this is an interesting one. This is one of those fights where I understand why Sandhagen's the favourite. You know, Frankie's old, he's on a decline. But this one could get super interesting, man. Out of all the big favourites on the card, I think Sandhagen's one of those ones that you could be looking at to get upset. But anyway, let me know what you think, boys. Let me know what you think, you know? Let me know what you think. Leave a comment below. Am I way off here? Are there details I'm missing on Sandhagen's style? What makes you think that Sandhagen can keep this fight standing? Let me know, boys. Anyway, we'll move on to the next one. In the final fight we're going to be talking about in this video, we will now break down the fight between Alexander Volkov and Alistair Overeem. Alright, boys, main event time. So, Alexander Volkov for me is a very, very tempting bet. A super tempting bet. Unfortunately, he is a big favourite. If we take a look at the odds on this one, Volkov currently around about 1.50, which is going to be minus 200 for an implied probability of 67%. So Volkov, again, big favourite on this card, but I could definitely see why. Overeem's the underdog, 2.70 plus 170 for an implied probability of 37%. I can tell you right now, I wouldn't be betting Mr. Overeem here. So where do we begin with this one? So, remember what I was saying earlier on in the video when we were talking about Michael Johnson and Clay Guida. We see Volkov is in the same odds range as Michael Johnson. That means that Volkov's odds carry an implied probability of ballpark 70%. Which means this guy's got to have no major weaknesses here. In order to command odds in that odds range, you can't have any major weaknesses. Unfortunately, that's not the case with Volkov. He does have one big weakness here, which could get him into trouble, but I don't think it's going to dictate the outcome of this fight. So Volkov's big weakness is that even though his initial takedown defense is pretty good, just like with Michael Johnson, when he does get taken down, he hesitates, and he's very, very weak off his back. If you take Alexander Volkov down, he makes absolutely no attempt to get back up to his feet, and I hate that. Because what it means is, if you take this guy down, you can easily rack up 3-4 minutes of top control, run the clock down, and pace yourself. Which is exactly what Alistair Overeem is going to need to do. Because he's 40 years old, he's had 100 fights, you know, he's got 60 or he's got 70 pro MMA fights, God knows how many professional kickboxing fights. Overeem doesn't have the gas tank to fight at a high pace over 25 minutes, over 5 rounds. And Volkov pushes a very, very high pace. If you go and look at Alistair Overeem's recent fights against Augusto Sakai and Jairzinho Rosenstrike in particular, pacing is a key component of Alistair Overeem's style of fighting and also his tactics. In the post-fight interview against Augusto Sakai, you know, he was asked, why did you wait until, you know, the 3rd, 4th and the 5th rounds until you used your wrestling? And he said, you know, Sakai's got a good gas tank. I didn't want to come out in round 1 and 2, burn myself out, and then not have enough in the gas tank to win in the 4th and 5th. So Overeem's very tactical. But the problem with that style is that Volkov doesn't play that game. when we've watched Overeem against Augusto Sakai and against Jairzinho Rozenstruik, they've let Overeem fight at a very comfortable pace. If we take a look at the stats, we can see that in the Overeem versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik fight, take a look here, not too much happened. Not too much happened. You see Rozenstruik threw 14 strikes in round 3, 19 in round 2, 5 in round 1. He picked the volume up late on, but it was very much a chess match where both guys kind of stood in front of each other, chipped away with the odd strike, but Overeem wasn't really forced to work very hard. Compare that to Alexander Volkov, and you just see much higher output from this guy. Let's take a look at his stats. So if we take a look at Volkov's fight against... let's go to the Greg Hardy fight. I know that Greg Hardy broke his hand in this fight, which obviously made it a lot easier for Volkov, but you can see much higher volume, right? 23 strikes in round 1, 32 strikes in round 2, 31 strikes in round 3. What's another good example? If we look at the Walt Harris fight, in round 1 he threw 39 strikes. The point I'm trying to make is Overeem relies on trying to lull his opponents into a kind of a slow-paced fight so that he can pace himself over the entire duration of the matchup. But Volkov doesn't play that game. He's very aggressive, comes forward, throws a high volume of strikes, and will make you work. So the strategy that Overeem used against Jairzinho Rozenstruik and also against Augusto Sakai is not going to work here because Volkov will force him to engage. And Volkov is a tough Russian with a great chin, a lot of heart, and he's tough as nails. If you hurt Volkov, it's very, very difficult to put him away. So what's interesting about this fight is that Overeem may be forced to use his wrestling early on. Now, he can definitely get this fight to the ground and rack up a lot of control time on Volkov. He could also do big damage with his ground and pound. But for how long can he do it? We saw Curtis Blades get tired trying to take Volkov down and hold him down. And obviously, Blades is a young, hungry bull in the prime of his career with a phenomenal gas tank. If Blades gassed out trying to wet blanket Volkov, very likely Overeem will do the same. And so, if this were a 3-round fight, I think Overeem would be a reasonably good bet here at underdog odds because he'd definitely have enough gas in the tank to take Volkov down and control him for 2 out of the 3 rounds and win a decision. But with this being a 5-round fight, it gets a lot more complicated. It gets a lot more complicated for 2 major reasons. We know Volkov is going to come forward very aggressively with a lot of volume. And in order to try and deal with that, you need to try and alleviate that pressure and stop that volume. Now, there's 2 ways that Overeem can do that. He can either strike back and, hurt Volkov with strikes or match his volume and, just kind of deter Volkov from coming forward by getting the edge in some striking exchanges. But that's going to be difficult to do because Overeem is very much a single shot fighter. You don't see Overeem throw a very high volume of strikes. He tends to throw one and then hope his opponent backs up and leaves him alone for a few moments. Volkov won't do that. He'll get right back on top of him and continue working. The second option Overeem's got to alleviate that pressure and volume is to shoot takedowns. But remember Overeem's tactic for the Rozenstruik and Augusto Sakai fight where he couldn't keep shooting takedowns and grapple hard for 5 rounds. He had to kind of spread those takedowns and grappling down across the 5 rounds. He couldn't come out and do it in every round or he'd get tired. So what happens in this stage of the fight against Volkov where Overeem can't take him down because he's got to pace himself? I think we're going to see Overeem get outstruck by a wide margin, take big damage and may even get knocked out. Another huge concern I have with Overeem is that when you attack him, he just kind of backs up, goes behind the high boxing guard, lets you tee off on him, and just hopes you'll kind of get bored and then reset into kickboxing range. I'm not sure that's going to happen with Volkov. Volkov is very aggressive. There was a high volume of strikes, and I don't think he's going to let Overeem off the hook like that. So this is a very good stylistic matchup for Volkov. He's a tempting bet. If his odds improved a little bit, I would probably bet him here, but it's tough to take him as a big favourite just because we know Overeem's a dangerous striker. The chance of a flash KO is always possible in MMA, and on top of that, Volkov doesn't really make any effort to get back up to his feet when he gets taken down, but I'm not sure that's going to have a huge impact on this fight just because I don't believe Overeem can grapple hard for 5 rounds anyway. So that is it for this breakdown video, boys. I hope you liked it. If you want to watch breakdown videos for all the other fights on the card, check out my website, mabettingtips.com. And don't forget to take advantage of that promotion. Add the live betting pass for tomorrow night's card to checkout. Enter promo code OVEREEM and you'll be able to get it for free. And yes, like and subscribe if you haven't already. Take care, boys. Have a great weekend. Hope you crush it and make loads of money. And I will see you all